Hey guys, tonight we drift into the quiet world of medieval monasteries, where the soft rustle of robes and the faint scent of herbs mingle with the faint hum of daily prayers. Imagine yourself wandering through cloistered gardens, bathed in gentle sunlight, the air filled with the earthy aroma of soil and plants. You're about to uncover a story that's as soothing as it is unexpectedly colourful. The tale of how medieval nuns grew indigo to dye their monastery robes. Now, you might think this sounds about as thrilling as watching paint dry, or rather, fabric soak. And you're probably right, you won't survive this without a yawn or two, but hey, that's the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where in the world you're settling in for this sleepy history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of a medieval monastery's herb garden, a quiet sanctuary tucked away from the noisy bustle of medieval towns. This garden isn't just a patch of green, it's a carefully curated space where every plant has a purpose. Among the lavender, sage, and rosemary, there's a special patch devoted to a rather unassuming plant with a secret indigofera. This is the source of indigo dye, the deep, rich blue that colours the robes worn by the nuns within these stone walls. Indigo's allure in the Middle Ages was profound. It wasn't just any colour, it was a symbol of heavenly grace, a reflection of the sky and the infinite. The blue robes worn by the nuns were more than garments, they were a statement of spiritual devotion and purity. The deep blue hue was rare and precious, a visual reminder of the divine. You might think of it as the medieval equivalent of wearing designer labels, except these robes were dyed with painstaking care from a plant that required patience and skill to grow and process. Historians still argue whether indigo's symbolic meaning was universally understood or varied from region to region, but one thing is clear, the colour held a special place in monastic life. It was a colour of calm, contemplation, and connection to something greater than the daily grind of chores and prayers. But growing indigo was no easy task. It demanded a gardener's patience and a monk's dedication. The plant needed just the right conditions to thrive neither too wet nor too dry, with soil that was fertile but well drained. You can almost feel the cool morning dew on the leaves as the nuns tend to their precious crop, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of nature that allowed this plant to flourish. And here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval gardeners sometimes believed that talking to plants helped them grow better. So, it's not entirely out of the question that the nuns whispered gentle prayers or even a few encouraging words to their indigo plants, hoping for a bountiful harvest. Imagine that plant's thriving on a little medieval pep talk. The process of turning those humble leaves into the vibrant blue dye was a slow, almost magical transformation. It involved harvesting the leaves at just the right moment, then soaking them in water to ferment a process that released the dye's colour. This fermentation was a bit like brewing a potion, with vats bubbling quietly in the monastery's workshop. The air would be thick with a slightly sour, earthy smell, a scent that might not win any medieval perfume awards, but was essential to the craft. As you settle into this story, remember that indigo was more than a diet, was a thread woven into the fabric of medieval spirituality and daily life. The nuns' robes, dyed in this deep blue, connected them to a tradition that stretched back centuries and would ripple forward through history in unexpected ways. So, as you begin to feel your eyelids grow heavy, let the image of those quiet gardens and the slow transformation of leaves into colour lull you deeper into the calm world of medieval monasteries. where every shade of blue tells a story. You step closer now, your fingers brushing against the soft, feathery leaves of the Indigofera plant. It's a modest shrub, with slender branches and delicate, oval-shaped leaves that seem almost fragile under your touch. This plant, native to warmer regions like India and parts of Africa, found its way into medieval European monastery gardens through the slow, deliberate trade and exchange of botanical knowledge. You can almost feel the centuries of travel and curiosity packed into these leaves, as if each one carries whispers from distant lands. The origins of the Indigofera plant are fascinating in themselves. While the plant thrived in tropical climates, medieval monks and nuns were nothing if not resourceful. They adapted their gardens to nurture this exotic guest, often experimenting with different varieties to see which could survive the cooler, less predictable European weather. It's a bit like trying to keep a tropical fish alive in a temperate pond, challenging but not impossible with enough care. Historians still argue whether the Indigofera plants grown in European monasteries were direct imports from Asia, or whether they were cultivated from seeds that had adapted over time to local conditions. Some evidence suggests that the plants used in medieval Europe might have been a hybrid or a related species, a botanical compromise between the ideal and the possible. This debate adds a layer of mystery to the story, as if the very plants themselves are part of a medieval detective case. You notice how the leaves are arranged in clusters, almost like tiny hands folded in prayer fitting, considering their sacred use. The plants require well-drained soil, rich in nutrients, but not waterlogged, and a good amount of sunlight. The monks and nuns would have had to carefully tend to these conditions, balancing the needs of the Indigofera with the other plants in their garden. It's a delicate dance, one that demands patience and a keen eye. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval gardeners believed that the moon's phases influence plant growth. So, it's possible that the nuns timed their planting and harvesting of Indigofera leaves according to lunar calendars, hoping to harness cosmic forces for a better yield. Imagine the monastery garden bathed in moonlight, the nuns whispering prayers to both God and the stars as they tended their precious plants. The Indigofera's journey from exotic seed to monastery staple reflects the broader medieval fascination with the natural world and the desire to harness it for spiritual and practical purposes. This wasn't just gardening, it was a form of devotion, a way to connect with the divine through the rhythms of nature. As you breathe in the imagined scent of earth and leaves, you might also catch a faint hint of something else perhaps, the faint smoke from the monastery's kitchen, or the soft murmur of chanting from the chapel nearby. The Indigofera plant exists in this rich sensory tapestry, a living thread in the monastery's daily life. And while the plant itself may seem unremarkable at first glance, its significance was anything but. It was the source of a colour that transformed plain wool into robes that spoke of holiness and discipline. The Indigofera was a humble hero in the story of medieval monastic life, quietly growing and thriving in the shadows of stone walls and stained glass windows. So, as you settle deeper into this gentle narrative, let the image of the Indigofera planter bridge between distant lands and sacred spaces carry you softly forward, like a lullaby whispered through leaves. You trudge through the monastery's garden path, your boots crunching softly on the gravel as you take in the subtle signs of the Indigofera's needs. Growing indigo in medieval Europe was no small feat. The plant, accustomed to warmer, sunnier climes, demanded a delicate balance of soil, moisture, and temperature conditions that were often elusive in the cooler, rainier regions where many monasteries were located. You can almost feel the frustration of the gardeners, who had to coax this exotic guest into thriving in less than ideal surroundings. The soil had to be just right rich enough to nourish the plant, but well drained to prevent the roots from rotting. Too much rain, and the Indigofera would sulk, its leaves turning yellow and weak. Too little, and it would shrivel under the sun's gaze. The gardeners had to become amateur meteorologists, watching the skies and adjusting watering schedules as best they could. You might imagine them muttering under their breath about the unpredictable weather, wishing for a bit more sunshine to coax out that precious blue. Historians still argue whether medieval monasteries used sophisticated crop rotation or soil enrichment techniques to maintain soil fertility specifically for indigo cultivation. Some evidence points to the use of manure and compost, while other accounts suggest that the monks relied on natural fallow periods, letting the land rest between planting cycles. Either way, it was a slow, patient process, no quick fixes here. The growing season for indigo was relatively long, often requiring several months of steady care before the plants were ready for harvest. This meant that the monks and nuns had to plan their gardening calendars carefully, fitting indigo cultivation into the broader rhythm of monastery life, which was itself governed by the cycles of prayer and work. You can almost hear the soft chants echoing in the background as hands gently tend to the plants, a quiet harmony between labour and devotion. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval gardeners believed that certain herbs planted alongside Indigofera could protect it from pests or improve its growth. So, it's possible that the monastery gardens featured companion plants like marigolds or garlic nestled among the Indigofera, creating a botanical neighbourhood designed to keep the blue treasure safe. Picture a patchwork of green and gold, with the Indigofera's delicate leaves standing out like little emerald flames. The challenges of growing indigo meant that the crop was never abundant. This scarcity added to its value, making indigo-dyed robes a special, almost sacred possession. You might think of it as the medieval equivalent of a limited edition luxury item, one that required skill, patience, and a bit of luck to produce. Despite the difficulties, the monks and nuns persevered, driven by the spiritual significance of the colour and the practical need for durable, beautiful robes. The cultivation of indigo was a quiet testament to their dedication not just to their faith, but to the art and science of gardening in a world without modern conveniences. As you imagine the cool breeze rustling through the leaves and the soft murmur of water in the irrigation channels, let yourself sink deeper into the slow, steady rhythm of medieval life. The Indigofera grows patiently, a symbol of quiet perseverance, just as you settle into this gentle story ready to drift further into calm. You lean in closer now, watching as the nuns prepare to harvest the Indigofera leaves. The timing is crucial too early, and the leaves won't yield enough dye. Too late, and the colour will fade. You can almost feel the cool morning air, the dew still clinging to the leaves as the nuns move quietly through the rows, their hands gentle but sure. Each leaf is carefully picked, avoiding damage that could spoil the delicate chemical balance needed for the dye. Harvesting was a ritual in itself, often done by hand to ensure only the best leaves were selected. You might imagine the soft rustle of fabric as the nuns bend and gather, their movements synchronized with the slow, meditative pace of monastic life. The leaves, once collected, are bundled and carried to the dye workshop, where the real transformation begins. Historians still argue whether the leaves were harvested multiple times during the growing season, or if the crop was cut all at once. Some records suggest a staggered harvest to maximize yield, while others hint at a single decisive gathering. Either way, the process required careful judgment and experience, a skill passed down through generations of monastic gardeners. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval texts mention the use of singing or chanting during harvest, believed to encourage the plants to release their best qualities. Whether this was poetic license or actual practice, it adds a charming layer to the story. Imagine a choir of nuns serenading the Indigofera as they pick its leaves. Once harvested, the leaves needed to be processed quickly to prevent spoilage. The nuns would spread them out in shallow baskets or trays, allowing them to wilt slightly before the next step. This wilting was importante, began the breakdown of the plant's cellular structure, releasing the precursors to the indigo dye. You can almost smell the fresh, green scent of crushed leaves, mingled with the faint earthiness of the garden soil. It's a sensory snapshot of a moment frozen in time where nature and human hands meet in a delicate dance. The careful harvesting of indigo leaves was not just a practical necessity, but a spiritual act, connecting the nuns to the cycles of growth and renewal. The blue dye that would emerge from these leaves was a symbol of their faith and dedication, a visible sign of their commitment to a life of contemplation and service. As you imagine the bundles of leaves being carried through the monastery halls, the quiet footsteps echoing softly on stone floors, let the rhythm of this ancient ritual soothe you. The leaves you see now will soon become the deep, calming blue of monastic Robiza transformation, as gentle and deliberate as the night settling around you. You step into the dimly lit dye workshop, where large wooden vats bubble quietly, their surfaces shimmering with a mysterious, deep blue liquid. This is the heart of the indigo transformation, the fermentation process that turns ordinary leaves into the rich dye that colours monastery robes. The air here is thick with a pungent, earthy aroma, a mix of sourness and something almost sweet, like the scent of forgotten forest floors. It's not exactly what you'd call pleasant, but it's essential to the magic at work. The process begins with soaking the freshly harvested indigofera leaves in water, allowing them to ferment for several days. This fermentation breaks down the plant's compounds, releasing indicin, which then converts into indigotin, the actual blue dye. You can almost hear the faint bubbling and the occasional soft hiss as gases escape from the vats, a slow alchemical dance that transforms green leaves into liquid blue gold. Historians still argue whether the fermentation was carefully controlled with specific additives or left to natural processes. Some suggest that monks added substances like lime or ash to regulate the pH levels, optimizing dye quality. Others believe it was more of a trial and error art, with each monastery developing its own secret recipe. Either way, this vat process was a guarded craft, passed down through generations. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval dye workshops sometimes had their own dye masters, who were rumoured to possess almost mystical knowledge of the vats. Some legends even claim that these masters could read the colour of the liquid to predict the success of the dye batch, like medieval wine sommelier of blue. Imagine the quiet confidence of a nun or monk peering into a bubbling vat, nodding wisely as if communing with the dye itself. Once fermentation was complete, the liquid was carefully stirred and aerated, often by pouring it between containers or beating it with sticks to encourage oxidation. This step caused the liquid to change colour, deepening into the iconic indigo blue. You might picture the workshop filled with the gentle sounds of splashing and stirring, a rhythmic backdrop to the patient work. The dye was then left to settle, allowing the solid indigo particles to sink to the bottom. These particles were collected and pressed into cakes or balls, which could be stored and later dissolved in water for dyeing fabric. The cakes were prized, possessions compact, potent, and ready to bring colour to the plainest cloth. As you imagine this slow, transformative process, think about the patience it demanded. The monks and nuns weren't just making dye, they were engaging in a ritual of creation, turning the raw gifts of nature into something beautiful and meaningful. The fermentation vats were their alchemical cauldrons, blending science, art, and faith. So, as you feel the gentle hum of the workshop's quiet activity, let the image of those bubbling vats and the deepening blue wash over you, soothing and steady, like the slow turning of night into sleep. You find yourself in the monastery's dyeing chamber, where bundles of wool and linen hang patiently, waiting their turn to be transformed. The air here is thick with the smell of damp fabric and the faint tang of indigo dye scent that might not win any medieval fragrance awards, but carries the promise of vibrant colour. You watch as the nuns and monks carefully dip the cloth into the vats, submerging the plain fibres into the deep blue liquid, then lifting them out to dry. The dyeing process was a delicate balance of timing and technique. The fabric had to be soaked just long enough to absorb the dye, but not so long that it weakened the fibres. After each dip, the cloth was exposed to air, allowing oxidation to deepen the blue colour. This repeated dipping and drying cycle could go on for hours, sometimes days, until the desired shade was achieved. You might imagine the rhythmic dipping, the soft swish of fabric moving through water, a quiet meditation in motion. Historians still argue about the exact methods used to fix the dye onto the fabric. Some suggest that the monks used natural mordant substances that help the dye bind to fibres like alum or tannin, while others believe the indigo itself was unique enough to adhere without additional chemicals. This debate adds a layer of mystery to the dyeing craft, as if the monks held secrets lost to time. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some monasteries, the dyeing process was accompanied by chants or prayers, believed to bless the fabric and ensure the colour's longevity. Imagine the soft chorus of voices rising above the gentle splashing, a spiritual soundtrack to the creation of those iconic blue robes. The dyed fabric wasn't just for show, it was durable, practical, and carried symbolic weight. The blue robes marked the wearer as part of a devoted community, a visual sign of humility and faith. The colour itself was thought to protect against evil spirits and bring calm to the wearer's medieval version of blue mood lighting, if you will. You can almost feel the texture of the wool, now softened and coloured, ready to be sewn into robes that would be worn through countless prayers and quiet moments of reflection. The transformation from plain fibre to vibrant garment was a slow, deliberate process, mirroring the monastic life's rhythm of work and contemplation. As you imagine the gentle sway of dyed robes hanging to dry in the monastery courtyard, let the calm, steady pace of this ancient craft lull you deeper into relaxation. The indigo's deep blue is like a soft blanket, wrapping around you with the quiet assurance of history and tradition. You slip quietly into the chapel, where the soft glow of stained glass filters through, casting blue hues that seem to echo the colour of the nuns' robes. Indigo wasn't just a practical choice, it carried deep symbolic meaning. The rich blue was a colour of heaven, representing the infinite sky and the divine mystery that the nuns sought to embody in their daily lives. Wearing indigo robes was like wrapping oneself in a piece of the sacred, a constant reminder of spiritual devotion. This symbolism wasn't unique to one monastery or region. Across medieval Europe, blue was associated with the Virgin Mary, often depicted in flowing blue robes in religious art. The colour's connection to purity, truth, and contemplation made it a natural choice for monastic communities. You might imagine the nuns moving through their daily prayers, their robes a silent hymn of colour, blending with the blue light that filled the chapel. Historians still argue whether the choice of indigo blue was driven more by its symbolic resonance or by practical considerations like dye availability and durability. Some suggest that the colour's spiritual significance grew over time, shaped by the very act of wearing it daily. Others believe that indigo's rarity and cost elevated its status, making it a symbol of piety and prestige. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval texts, blue was thought to have protective powers, warding off evil spirits and bad luck. So, those indigo robes might have been seen as spiritual armour, a wearable blessing in a world full of uncertainties. Imagine the nuns feeling a little safer, a little more serene, simply by donning their blue garments. The colour also marked the wearer's role within the monastery. Different hues and shades could indicate rank or specific duties, though these distinctions were subtle and varied between communities. The indigo robes were a unifying thread, visually linking the nuns in a shared identity and purpose. As you picture the soft folds of those deep blue robes, moving gently with each step and breath, let the colours calm wash over you. The indigo is more than diets a quiet meditation, a soothing presence that carries centuries of faith and tradition. So, as your eyelids grow heavier, think of the nuns in their blue robes, serene and steady, a living symbol of devotion wrapped in the gentle embrace of indigo. You find yourself tracing the winding paths of medieval trade routes, where indigo dye travelled like a precious secret, whispered from one marketplace to another. The rarity of indigo made it a valuable commodity coveted far beyond the monastery walls. You can almost hear the clatter of carts and the murmur of merchants negotiating over bundles of indigo cakes, their deep blue hue promising wealth and status. Indigo wasn't native to Europe, so it had to be imported, often from distant lands like India or parts of the Middle East. The journey was long and perilous, involving multiple hands and modes of transport. Each step added to the dye's mystique and cost. You might imagine the dye cakes wrapped carefully in cloth, guarded jealously by traders who knew their value. Historians still argue about the exact medieval trade routes that brought indigo to Europe. Some evidence points to overland routes through the Silk Road, while other scholars emphasize maritime paths along the Mediterranean and Red Sea. The truth is likely a complex web of connections, with indigo weaving through many hands before reaching the monasteries. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval markets, indigo was so prized that it was used as a form of currency or barter. Imagine a merchant paying his debts with a handful of blue dye, the colour itself a symbol of wealth and trust. The scarcity of indigo also meant that monasteries had to be judicious in its use. Dyeing robes was a careful balance between spiritual symbolism and economic reality. The nuns' robes were often a deep but muted blue, reflecting both the dye's preciousness and the monastic vow of modesty. Trade in indigo also had ripple effects beyond the dye itself. It connected distant cultures, spreading botanical knowledge and influencing fashion and art across continents. The monasteries, often seen as isolated, were in fact part of this vast network of exchange, their gardens and workshops linked to faraway lands by the thread of indigo. As you imagine the bustling markets and the slow journey of indigo across deserts and seas, let the story's gentle rhythm carry you further into the night. The blue dye's long voyage is a quiet reminder that even the simplest things, like a colour can, hold stories as vast as the world itself. So, as your breath deepens and your mind drifts, picture those precious indigo cakes travelling across ancient lands, bringing a touch of the exotic to the serene monastery gardens where your story began. You stroll through the colourful world of medieval dyes, where indigo shared the stage with a cast of rivals like woad and madder. Each dye had its own story, its own quirks, and its own fans, but indigo held a special place in the hearts of monastic dyers. Woad, a native European plant, produced a blue dye too, but it was often paler and less vibrant. Madder, on the other hand, gave reds and pinks a fiery contrast to indigo's cool depths. The rivalry between indigo and woad was particularly intense. Woad was easier to grow locally, but indigo's deeper, richer blue was more prized. Some monasteries used a mix of both, trying to stretch their precious indigo supply while still achieving that coveted colour. You can almost hear the debates among monks and nuns, weighing the cost and quality of each dye, like medieval fashion critics with a palette of plants. Historians still argue whether indigo completely supplanted woad in Europe, or whether the two coexisted for centuries, each favoured in different regions or contexts. This ongoing debate adds a layer of intrigue, as if the Battle of Blues was a slow, simmering contest rather than a sudden takeover. Here's a quirky tidbit. Woad leaves were sometimes used as a medicinal herb, believed to have healing properties, while indigo was mostly prized for its colour. So, while indigo was the star of the dye world, woad had its own backstage role in medieval health and herbalism. Imagine a monastery garden where one plant healed wounds and the other dyed Robisa botanical multitasking act. Madder's vibrant reds were often reserved for other orders or secular clothing, making indigo the blue of choice for many monastic communities. The colour distinctions helped visually separate different groups, a medieval version of dress codes, but with plants and pigments. As you picture the patchwork of colours in the medieval world, deep blues, soft woad blues, fiery redslet, the gentle contrast soothe you. The rivalry of dyes is less about conflict and more about variety, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of history, there's a spectrum of stories. So, as your thoughts begin to wander and your body relaxes, imagine the soft swirl of colours in a medieval dye workshop, each shade a note in a soothing lullaby of history. You find yourself stepping behind the scenes, where the real labour of indigo dyeing unfolds a world of hands stained blue, of quiet toil and careful craft. The nuns and lay workers who tended the indigo plants, harvested the leaves, and managed the vats were the unsung heroes of this process. Their work was physically demanding, requiring strength, patience, and a steady rhythm to keep the delicate balance of dye production. The social roles within the monastery were complex. While the nuns often oversaw the dyeing process, lay sisters or hired workers might have done much of the heavy lifting. This division of labour reflected the broader medieval social structure, where spiritual duties and manual work were intertwined yet distinct. You can almost hear the soft chatter and the occasional chuckle as hands dipped fabric and stirred vats, a quiet camaraderie born of shared purpose. Historians still argue about the extent to which indigo dyeing was a communal activity versus a specialised craft reserved for a few skilled individuals. Some records suggest that dyeing was part of the daily routine for many, while others point to specialised dye masters who guarded their techniques closely. This debate highlights the tension between tradition and innovation in monastic life. Here's a quirky tidbit. The constant exposure to indigo dye often left workers with blue-stained skin and nails, a badge of honour and a permanent reminder of their craft. Imagine a nun with fingertips dipped in blue, a subtle but visible sign of her dedication to the monastery's work. The economic importance of indigo dyeing extended beyond the monastery walls. The robes produced were sometimes sold or traded, providing income that supported the community's needs. This practical aspect of dyeing linked spiritual devotion with economic survival, a balance that monks and nuns navigated daily. As you imagine the steady rhythm of work hands moving in practiced motions, vats bubbling softly, fabric swaying gently the scene's quiet energy lull you deeper into calm. The labour behind the colour is a story of dedication, resilience, and the simple beauty of making something meaningful with your own hands. So, as your breath slows and your thoughts soften, picture those blue-stained hands at work, weaving history and faith into every thread of fabric. You wander into the monastery's scriptorium, where the flicker of candlelight dances across pages illuminated with vibrant colours. Among the reds, golds, and greens, you notice the striking presence of indigo blue, used to highlight letters and decorate intricate borders. The deep blue pigment derived from indigo dye was prized not only for robes, but also for its role in medieval art and manuscripts. Illuminated manuscripts were the medieval equivalent of luxury items, painstakingly crafted by monks and nuns who combined artistry with devotion. The indigo pigment added depth and richness to these sacred texts, making the words come alive with colour and meaning. You can almost hear the scratch of quills and the soft murmur of prayers as the artists worked, their brushes dipping into the precious blue. Historians still argue about the exact methods used to produce indigo pigment for manuscripts. Some believe that the same dye cakes used for fabric were ground and mixed with binders, while others suggest specialized recipes were developed to create a more stable pigment. This ongoing debate reflects the challenges of preserving color in delicate parchment over centuries. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some manuscripts, indigo was mixed with other pigments to create unique shades, sometimes resulting in unexpected colors like a muted teal or a dusty violet. Imagine the surprise of a medieval artist discovering these accidental hues, a happy little accident centuries before Bob Ross made it famous. The use of indigo in manuscripts wasn't merely decorative, it carried symbolic weight. Blue was associated with the divine and the infinite, so its presence on sacred texts reinforced their spiritual significance. The colour helped guide readers' eyes, emphasizing important passages and inviting contemplation. As you imagine the quiet focus of the scriptorium, the scent of parchment and ink mingling with the soft glow of candlelight, let the image of those vibrant blues soothe you. The indigo pigment is more than colour, it's a bridge between art, faith and history, a gentle reminder of the beauty that arises from patience and care. So, as your eyelids grow heavier, picture the slow, deliberate strokes of the brush, the deep blue flowing across pages like a calm river, carrying you gently toward rest. You step outside the monastery walls, where the cultivated indigo plants have quietly reshaped the surrounding landscape. The fields, once dominated by native grasses and wildflowers, now bear the neat rows of indigo fira, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. This transformation wasn't without consequence. The introduction of indigo cultivation altered soil composition and local ecosystems in subtle but lasting ways. The plant's demand for nutrients and water meant that monastery gardeners had to manage the land carefully, sometimes clearing other vegetation to make room. Over time, this could lead to changes in soil quality, affecting not only the indigo but neighbouring crops and wild plants. You might imagine the monks pondering these effects, balancing their spiritual mission with the practical realities of stewardship. Historians still argue about the environmental impact of medieval indigo cultivation. Some suggest that it contributed to soil depletion and changes in local biodiversity, while others believe the careful monastic practices minimized harm. This debate reflects broader questions about medieval agriculture and its sustainability. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval gardeners believed that indigo plants could cleanse the soil, improving its fertility for future crops. While modern science doesn't fully support this idea, it shows how intertwined practical knowledge and folklore were in medieval gardening. Picture a monk inspecting the fields, convinced that the blue plants were doing more than just providing dye, they were healing the earth itself. The environmental story of indigo is a reminder that even seemingly small changes in land use can ripple outward, affecting communities and ecosystems. The monasteries, often seen as isolated spiritual centres, were in fact active participants in shaping their natural surroundings. As you imagine the gentle sway of indigo plants in the breeze, the soft rustle of leaves mingling with birdsong, let this quiet scene ease your mind. The land and the plants are in a slow, ongoing conversation, a dance of growth and renewal that mirrors your own journey toward rest. So, as your breath deepens and your body relaxes, Picture the blue fields stretching out under a calm sky, a peaceful landscape cradling you gently into sleep. You settle into a cozy nook of the monastery library, where the flickering candlelight casts shadows on ancient parchment filled with tales and legends. Among these stories, you find curious whispers about Indigoite's magical and protective powers woven into folklore that mingled with the monks' daily prayers. Indigo wasn't just a dye, it was a colour wrapped in mystery, believed to hold charms against evil and misfortune. One popular legend tells of a nun who, during a fierce storm, wrapped herself in an indigo-dyed robe and was miraculously shielded from harm. The blue fabric seemed to act as a protective shield, a tangible blessing woven from the plant's essence. You might imagine the nuns sharing these stories during quiet evenings, their voices low and reverent as the wind howled outside. Historians still argue whether these tales were widespread beliefs or localized traditions confined to specific monasteries. Some suggest that the protective qualities attributed to indigo were symbolic, reflecting the color's spiritual significance rather than literal magic. Others believe that these legends helped reinforce the dye's value and the reverence for the plants that produced it. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, people believed that wearing indigo could ward off the evil eye, a superstition that bad luck or harm could be cast by a jealous glance. So, those blue robes might have been more than spiritual symbols. They were also medieval good luck charms. Imagine the nuns feeling a little extra confidence, knowing their robes had a bit of mystical backup. The intertwining of folklore and faith gave indigo a special place in medieval life, blurring the lines between the natural and the supernatural. The dye's deep blue was a colour of calm, protection, and mysterious soothing presence in a world full of uncertainties. As you imagine the soft glow of candlelight and the whispered stories shared among cloistered walls, let the gentle magic of indigo lull you deeper into calm. The colour's quiet power is a comforting thread, weaving history, faith, and myth into a peaceful tapestry. So, as your thoughts drift and your body relaxes, picture the blue robes glowing softly in the firelight, carrying you gently toward rest. You trace the slow arc of indigo's journey through time, watching as its prominence in medieval monasteries begins to wane, only to rise again in later centuries. The decline wasn't sudden, but a gradual fading, influenced by shifting trade routes, economic changes, and the rise of alternative dyes. Indigo, once a symbol of spiritual devotion and luxury, found itself edged out by more accessible or fashionable colours. By the late Middle Ages, woad, the native European blue dye, reasserted itself in some regions, partly because it was easier and cheaper to cultivate. You might imagine the monastery gardens becoming less crowded with indigofera, the vats less frequently stirred, as the dye's mystique dimmed. Yet, indigo never disappeared. Entirely, it lingered like a quiet memory, waiting for its moment to return. Historians still argue about the reasons for indigo's decline and revival. Some point to economic factors, such as the disruption of trade routes during wars and plagues, while others highlight changing tastes and technological advances in dyeing. The story is complex, a tapestry of social, economic, and cultural threads woven together. Here's a quirky tidbit. During its decline, indigo was sometimes confused with other blue dyes, leading to mix-ups in trade and dyeing. Imagine a medieval merchant scratching his head over a shipment of indigo that turned out to be something else, entirely a blue mystery worthy of its own story. The revival of indigo came with the expansion of global trade in the early modern period, when European explorers and colonists brought back new supplies from Asia and the Americas. Indigo became a major commodity, fueling economies and influencing fashion far beyond monastery walls. The humble plant that once coloured nuns' robes now dyed the fabrics of kings and commoners alike. As you imagine the ebb and flow of indigo's fortunes, let the slow rhythm of history soothe you. The dye's journey is a reminder that even the quietest things can have long, winding stories, full of surprises and resilience. So, as your breath deepens and your mind drifts, picture the indigofera plant resting in its garden bed, waiting patiently for its next chapter to unfold, carrying you gently towards sleep. You find yourself peering through the lens of modern science, where researchers carefully analyze fragments of indigo-dyed fabric from medieval monasteries. Using advanced techniques like spectroscopy and chromatography, scientists uncover secrets hidden in the fibre clues about the plants used, the dyeing methods, and even the environmental conditions of the time. It's like a detective story, with molecules as witnesses and centuries-old robes as the evidence. These studies reveal that the indigo used in medieval Europe was remarkably consistent in quality, suggesting skilled craftsmanship and careful control of the dyeing process. You might imagine lab coats replacing habits, microscopes replacing vats, but the curiosity and dedication remain the same. The science bridges past and present, connecting you to those quiet monks and nuns who once tended their plants with care. Historians still argue about how much modern analysis can tell us about medieval techniques. Some believe that chemical signatures can definitively identify plant species and dye recipes, while others caution that degradation over time and contamination complicate interpretations. This ongoing debate keeps the story open, inviting new discoveries. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scientific studies have found traces of unexpected substances mixed with indigo, like beeswax or animal fats, hinting at experimental or improvised methods. Imagine medieval dyers as early chemists, tinkering with recipes in their quest for the perfect blue. The intersection of science and history enriches our understanding of indigo's legacy, showing how ancient knowledge can inform modern techniques and vice versa. It's a reminder that even the simplest plants carry complex stories waiting to be uncovered. As you imagine the gentle hum of laboratory instruments and the careful hands of researchers, let the blend of old and new soothe you. The quest to understand indigo is a quiet journey across time, connecting you to the past with every discovery. So, as your eyelids grow heavy, picture those tiny molecules whispering stories of blue, carrying you softly toward rest. You find yourself at the crossroads of scholarly debate, where historians and botanists gather to untangle the origins of European indigo. Was the indigo grown in medieval monasteries truly native, or did it come from imported plants? This question has sparked lively discussions, with evidence pointing in multiple directions. You can almost hear the academic back and forth, a gentle battle of theories played out in dusty libraries and modern labs alike. Some scholars argue that European indigofera was a local variant or a closely related species, adapted over time to cooler climates. Others insist that the prized dye plants were imported from Asia or Africa, their seeds carried along trade routes and carefully cultivated in monastery gardens. This debate is more than botanicality, touches on medieval trade, cultural exchange, and the movement of knowledge. Historians still argue whether the indigo plants in Europe were genetically distinct from their tropical cousins, or simply the same species grown under different conditions. This ongoing research highlights the complexity of medieval globalization long before the term existed. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval manuscripts include illustrations of indigo plants that don't quite match known species, suggesting that artists might have combined features or imagined idealized versions. Imagine a medieval botanical artist mixing fact and fantasy, creating a plant that's part indigo, part Imaginatione botanical dreamscape. The origin debate reminds us that history is rarely straightforward. The plants that coloured those serene blue robes carry stories of migration, adaptation, and human ingenuity. They are living symbols of a world connected in surprising ways. As you imagine scholars poring over ancient texts and genetic sequences, let the gentle hum of inquiry soothe you. The search for indigo's roots is a quiet journey, weaving together past and present in a tapestry of discovery. So, as your breath slows and your mind drifts, picture the Indigofera plant as both a real and imagined presence, bridging worlds and centuries, carrying you softly towards sleep. You step softly into the monastery's dye workshop, where the air is thick with the earthy scent of fermenting leaves and the gentle splash of water. This place is alive with sensory details. The cool dampness on your skin, the rough texture of wool waiting to be dyed, and the faint hum of conversation mingling with the rhythmic stirring of vats. It's a world you can almost touch, smell, and hear, grounding the story in the tangible. The sensory experience of indigo dyeing was as much a part of the craft as the plants themselves. The smell of fermenting leaves was pungent, sometimes described as sour or musty, a scent that might make modern noses wrinkle but was a sign of progress to medieval dyers. The feel of wet wool, heavy and cool, contrasted with the warmth of drying cloth hanging in the sun. You might imagine the soft rustle of fabric as it moved in the breeze, a quiet symphony of texture and sound. Historians still argue about how sensory experiences influenced the dyeing process. Some suggest that dyers relied on smell and touch as indicators of fermentation progress and dye quality, while others believe written instructions and tradition played a larger role. This debate highlights the intimate knowledge passed down through hands and senses, a form of expertise that transcended words. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some dye workshops reportedly used herbs or flowers to mask the strong odours of fermentation, filling the air with hints of lavender or rosemary. Imagine the unexpected blend of sour indigo and sweet herbs, a medieval version of aromatherapy gone slightly sideways. The sensory world of indigo dyeing connects you to the everyday realities of medieval life, the smells, sounds, and textures that shaped the monks' and nuns' daily routines. It's a reminder that history isn't just about facts and dates, but about lived experience. As you breathe in this imagined atmosphere, let the sensory details wrap around you like a soft blanket. The scent, the touch, the quiet sounds all combine to lull you deeper into calm. So, as your eyelids grow heavy, picture the gentle splash of water, the rustle of fabric, and the faint scent of herbs mingling with indigo's earthy aroma, carrying you softly toward rest. You slip back into the monastery's daily rhythm, where the indigo-dyed robes are more than just garments, they are woven into the very fabric of monastic life. The nuns rise early, their blue robes whispering softly as they move through the cool stone corridors toward morning prayers. The colour is a constant companion, a visual thread linking moments of work, worship, and quiet reflection. Monastic schedules were strict, governed by the canonical hourstimes set aside for prayer, study, and labour. The dyeing and maintenance of robes fit seamlessly into this rhythm, a task both practical and spiritual. You might imagine the soft murmur of chants blending with the gentle sound of fabric brushing against stone floors, a steady soundtrack to the day's unfolding. Historians still argue how much the act of wearing and caring for indigo robes influenced the monks' and nuns' spiritual experience. Some suggest that the colour's calming presence helped focus the mind during meditation, while others believe it was primarily a symbol of community and status. Either way, the robes were a tangible expression of monastic identity. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some monasteries had special days when robes were washed and re-dyed, turning the dyeing process into a communal event with prayers and feasting. Imagine the courtyard filled with laughter and blue-stained hands, a rare moment of celebration in an otherwise austere life. The daily life of the monastery, with its blend of discipline and devotion, was mirrored in the slow, deliberate care of indigo robes. The colour was a constant reminder of the vows taken and the shared purpose that bound the community together. As you imagine the steady flow of the day, the soft footsteps, the hushed prayers, the gentle rustle of blue fabriclet, the rhythm soothe you. The indigo robes are more than cloth. They are a lullaby of faith and routine, wrapping you gently toward rest. So, as your breath slows and your body relaxes, picture the nuns moving gracefully through their day, their blue robes, a calm, steady presence in the quiet monastery. You step beyond the monastery walls, where the influence of indigo dyeing ripples quietly through the surrounding villages and markets. The production of indigo wasn't confined to cloistered gardens. It had economic effects that reached far into the local community. Farmers, merchants, and artisans all felt the gentle pull of this precious blue woven into the fabric of everyday life. The monasteries often traded surplus indigo dye or dyed cloth with nearby towns, creating networks of exchange that supported both spiritual and secular economies. You might imagine carts laden with blue-dyed wool trundling down dusty roads, the scent of indigo mingling with the earthy smells of the countryside. The dye's value helped sustain the monastery and provided livelihoods for many beyond its walls. Historians still argue about the scale and impact of monastic indigo production on local economies. Some suggest that it was a significant source of income and employment, while others believe its role was more modest, overshadowed by other agricultural products. This debate reflects the complexity of medieval economic life, where spiritual and material needs intertwined. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, indigo dyeing inspired local festivals celebrating the colour blue, complete with songs, dances, and blue-painted decorations. Imagine villagers donning blue scarves and hats, turning the humble dye into a source of communal pride and joy. The economic ripple effects of indigo remind you that even the quietest crafts can shape communities and cultures. The blue dye was a thread connecting monastery life with the wider world, a symbol of interdependence and shared prosperity. As you picture the lively markets and the steady flow of goods, let the gentle hum of community life soothe you. The story of indigo is not just about plants and robes, but about people and connections weaving a comforting pattern. So, as your breath deepens and your mind softens, imagine the blue-dyed fabrics fluttering in the breeze of village squares, carrying you gently toward rest. You find yourself reflecting on the enduring legacy of indigo in the tapestry of history colour that transcended its humble botanical origins to become a symbol of faith, artistry, and connection. From the quiet monastery gardens to the bustling medieval markets, indigo's journey is a story of patience, devotion, and transformation. The deep blue of indigo-dyed robes still resonates today, echoing through centuries of art, culture, and fashion. Modern designers and historians alike draw inspiration from this ancient hue, recognizing its timeless beauty and rich symbolism. You might imagine the soft glow of indigo fabrics in contemporary galleries, a bridge linking past and present. Historians continue to explore indigo's multifaceted story, uncovering new insights into its cultivation, trade, and cultural significance. This ongoing research keeps the colour alive, inviting each generation to discover its quiet magic anew. Here's a quirky tidbit. Indigo's name comes from the Greek word indikon, meaning from India, a nod to its exotic origins and the long journey it took to reach European shores. Imagine the excitement and wonder medieval monks felt when first encountering this mysterious plant and its vibrant colour. As you let these reflections settle, feel the calm embrace of indigo wrapping around you like a soft blanket. The story you've travelled through is a gentle lullaby, a soothing reminder that even the smallest things a leaf, a colour, a robe can carry profound meaning. So, as your eyes close and your breath slows, picture the deep, serene blue of indigo, a timeless hue cradling you softly into peaceful sleep.